Be still, says the Lord in that magnificent Psalm number 46. Be still and know that I am God. It's a beautiful thought, and it skewers me. I mean, how often am I still, truly still, quiet in body and serene in soul? That isn't the modern way, is it? We live in the most frenetic culture that ever was. Radios and TVs blaring, cell phones interrupting our meals, Blackberries in everybody's pockets, traffic up to our kazoos, construction sites all around us, bells and whistles on all our appliances. And as if that weren't enough, pagers, alarm clocks, talking calendars, even timers on our pillboxes. I saw a cartoon that showed a family setting up camp in the woods. They had brought their TV set, camera phones, video games, and a box full of other electronic devices. It's a good thing we've got this stuff, one of the kids is saying, or we couldn't shut out the noise of that stream and the waterfall. Be still and know that I'm God. That's a tough order in a world like this. We almost forget that there is another world, don't we? A world of silence and serenity, a world of deep peace and soulfulness, a world of quiet healing where our wounds are repaired and life grows over the broken places, a world of holiness and order, of mystery and transcendence, a world with God at its center. A couple of years ago, I did a wedding service for one of my former parishioners who's now an assistant to a U.S. senator in Washington. The groom had lived in New York, and several friends had come to D.C. for the wedding. I sat by one of them at the rehearsal dinner. His name was Mike. Mike had been an accountant in Brooklyn, but he was now retired. Now, he said, he was making up for lost time. He was having his haiku moments. You know what haiku are, those little 17-syllable Japanese poems about things the eye sees and the soul feels. Mike couldn't help telling me some of his haiku moments. One had been in Yellowstone Park. He'd gotten up before dawn and strolled over to Old Faithful, the big geyser. He watched the sky redden behind the steam coming up from the geyser hole, and then saw the great geyser spout into the air just as a flock of birds flew over. He said he thought his heart would stop. It was so beautiful. Another of his haiku moments had occurred just that morning in his own backyard. He'd been sitting on the back stoop, drinking a second cup of coffee, when a sparrow lit on the end of a tall sprig of grass. It held on as the grass rocked back and forth and back and forth. It thought it was on a seesaw, exclaimed Mike, who treasured the picture as much as if it had been painted by Rembrandt himself. I live more in a single day now, he said, than I used to live in a year. It's wonderful. I agreed. It is. I thought about my own working life as a minister and how sometimes I got so busy that I couldn't see the world around me and didn't have any haiku moments. Once I even talked to a psychologist about it. Here I am trying to point people to the abundant life, I said, and I can't feel any simple joys the way I used to. She suggested that I start noticing the joys I did feel and making a list of them at the end of the day. I did. I ran across some of those lists recently and noted some of the joys. They were mostly little things: the taste of honey and raisins in my yogurt, the sight of 3 hummingbirds at once on our back porch feeder, the sweet smell of dough rising, the coppery hue of the sun as the sun was setting, the sound of a fly buzzing in the window, the sound of a zipper being closed. But there were also conversations with various people, dining out with my wife, going up in an airplane, hiking in the mountains. What happened was that by a simple technique, I was recovering my sense of wonder. I was seeing the world again, standing in awe before it, admiring what God had made. I remember a lovely text in Annie Dillard's book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, that has always been exceptionally meaningful to me. Annie was taking a sabbatical leave from her job at Harper's Magazine, and she and her husband went to live on an old farm outside Salem, Virginia, near the college where she went to school. It was a very restorative time in her life when she learned to see the world all over again and sense its remarkable wonder. Sometimes she would bring a quart of creek water into the house and pour it into a vitreous china bowl. Then she would go back an hour later and examine the minute trails made by invisible creatures on the bottom of the bowl. One day, as she was turning the corner of an old barn, Annie said she looked up and saw a mockingbird suddenly fold its wings and dive 32 feet per second toward the earth. It looked as if it were intent on committing suicide. But then, at the very last moment, it raised its wings so that she could see that characteristic fluting of white that mockingbirds have on their wings and tails, and it merely stepped off onto the grass as if it were getting off an escalator. She was entranced and kept contemplating the sight. Later, she wrote in her journal that she'd been thinking about that old conundrum about the tree that falls in the forest. You know, if there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? I wondered, she said, if I hadn't come around that building at precisely that moment and seen it, would there have been grace and beauty there? I could only conclude, she said, that there would. There would have been grace and beauty there, whether I had been there to see them or not. But the very least we can do, she added, is to try to be there. Isn't that a beautiful thought? Grace and beauty are in the world whether we see them or not. They're all over the place. But the very least we can do is to try to be there. That's what Mike was doing with his haiku moments. He was trying to be there. It was what I was hoping to do by writing down my little joys. I was trying to be there. And the reason for being there? Be still, said the Lord, and know that I am God. When our hearts are quiet, when we are waiting and listening and watching, when we see the world around us, really see it, we know that God is God. It's as simple as that. God isn't necessarily in the sunrise over Yellowstone or in a dinner with one's spouse or in a mockingbird diving to earth. But these things are reminders that God isn't far away, that life in all its wonder is only an outer garment of God, that God is as close as the breath we take or the breath we expel, that God is always waiting to reveal himself to the eye that can see and the ear that can hear. Be still and know that I'm God. It isn't easy in our razzle-dazzle world with all its bells and whistles, its bangs and booms, its blares and distractions. Some voices are even warning that we shall lose the ability to discern God in this age because our consciousness is always under bombardment by something else. I wouldn't go that far, but I do worry that I shall miss him a lot of times when he was there and I was simply too busy or preoccupied to notice. Noticing, that's the name of the game, isn't it? Being conscious, being aware, being present. The least we can do is to be there.